Yeah, very much. That was very nice. Welcome to this wonderful conversation with leaders in the battle against injustice in the criminal justice system. My colleague Sherry Berkowitz will more fully introduce Penny in just a moment, but I wanted to take this opportunity to thank a few other people without whom this series would not have been possible, and briefly describe the work of the Loundy Human Rights Project. So this is the third in a series of 5 talks this semester. It's our 3rd annual Wrongful Conviction Distinguished Speaker Series, and we've been very proud to host a huge number of the leaders nationally in doing this work and exposing the reasons for wrongful convictions and the ways forward in terms of being able to hopefully do away with them in the future. I wanted to first and foremost thank Joe Loundy, who is the founder of the Loundy Human Rights Project. He's right here up front in the corner, although he's trying to disappear into his chair, I think, right now. He's very humble. Joe is truly, really a legend although he would never claim to be, in social justice work in Chicago. He's a graduate of both Roosevelt and the University of Chicago's School of Social Service Administration, and has been the president of that alumni group, and then also is now the president of the College of Arts and Sciences Advisory Board here at Roosevelt. He is involved in a huge range of work, from being one of the founders of the Center on Halsted to doing work with immigrant communities here in Chicago and supporting especially arts and cultural institutions both here in Chicago and abroad, especially in Southeast Asia. And is also the president of the Chicago Art Deco Society. So there's nothing that Joe hasn't helped in Chicago in some way. The program here at Roosevelt is an undergraduate human rights research program. We rotate among several interrelated social justice and human rights issues. Through the program, the students study the sources of miscarriages of justice and work toward the most fruitful areas of reform through the kind of interaction that we see in this kind of conversation with Penny, with attorneys, academics, other experts in the field, and also wrongly convicted individuals like Nicole Harris, who we had about 3 weeks ago, and others that we've hosted over the course of the last couple of years. We then build partnerships with innocence projects here and abroad, and we'll be going to London. We go to some place abroad each year to study whatever the human rights challenge is from a comparative perspective. So we'll be going to London over the Thanksgiving week to work with leaders in innocence work in England. The series is also sponsored by the College of Arts and Sciences, and I want to thank especially Associate Dean Julie Rowan and Devani Gunzenhauser, Laura Janoda in PR, my graduate assistant Diana, and especially the other sponsor of the series, the Department of Psychology, especially Professor Sherry Berkowitz, my co-organizer, who has been absolutely instrumental in making this series happen. The last 2 years as well, but especially this year, has just really picked up a huge amount of slack and done a lot of amazing work. I wanted to invite everyone to please join us for our upcoming dates. November 6th is Judge Robert, I didn't mispronounce it, Milan? Okay, and then November 13th, Rob Gordon, who is the outgoing head of the Center on Wrongful Convictions at Northwestern, and really has just made some of the most amazing things happen in Illinois around this work. On December 11th, the students will be reporting on their work in London, so I hope that you can join us for that as well. There's an email list in the back if you'd like to be notified of future dates. We don't send out a lot of things, so you will not get a lot of spam. And with that, I want to turn things over to Sherry.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you so much, Bethany, for that kind introduction. As Dr. Barrett just shared with you, I'm Sherry Berkowitz, and I'm an assistant professor in the psychology department here at Roosevelt. And I am honored to be with you this evening to be able to introduce our distinguished speaker. Before I do so, I do want to add, I know a number of you have 6 o'clock class to get to. Our speaker knows that as well, and she knows that it will not be a personal attack at all on her talk if you need to leave a few minutes early. So if you do need to leave early, please just do so the best you can as quietly as possible. That said, it's an honor and privilege for me to introduce our speaker this evening, Penny Beerntsen. Penny Beerntsen is a courageous and kind woman who, back in 1985, survived a brutal sexual assault and attack. And she'll share more about that experience with you tonight, but we're absolutely privileged to have her here at Roosevelt and hear about her healing journey. And I want to share just a bit more with you about that experience. Penny was a careful eyewitness who gave a description of her assailant to the sheriff's deputy and eventually identified a picture of the man who she believed to be her attacker from both a photo array and later a live lineup. This man that she identified, Stephen Avery, was 23 years old, married, the father of 5 children, and ultimately was convicted almost solely on Beerntsen's eyewitness identification. He was sentenced to 32 years in prison. Avery, however, was innocent. And thanks to the work of the Wisconsin Innocence Project, it was discovered in September of 2003 that DNA testing proved conclusively that Avery was not Beerntsen's attacker. In fact, not only did DNA testing exclude Avery, but it identified the actual assailant. And I know Penny will share much more with us about her experience tonight in terms of working through that devastation that she felt from this news. But let me share with you that following Stephen Avery's exoneration, the state of Wisconsin put together a criminal justice study commission to look at issues of eyewitness identification and false confessions, and Beerntsen was privileged to serve on this commission from 2005 until its dissolution in 2008. And I don't know how much Penny will share with you tonight, but this case and her experiences received a great deal of media attention. And back in 2006, the case was subject of the Dateline episode Suspicion, and also a book, which I see she'll share with us. So her case was also featured in the book Being Wrong by Catherine Schultz. Now, what's quite amazing about Ms. Beerntsen is that as part of her own healing journey, she has become truly a leader in the restorative justice movement. And she'll talk with us more about her experiences, but she may not brag to you the same way that I will about some of that work, so I'd like to make sure that I touch upon that briefly. Beerntsen became trained as a mediator after her experiences and began facilitating dialogues between juvenile offenders, most of whom had committed property crimes, and their victims. And she believed that this process might be able to help young offenders understand the impact of their crimes, and therefore she wanted to try and help them to essentially lower the recidivism rate and not reoffend. And she's also become certified in mediating crimes of severe violence through a program at the University of Minnesota, and began facilitating dialogue between sexual assault survivors and their offenders. She's participated in numerous victim impact panels, most of them inside Wisconsin medium and maximum security prisons. And Beerntsen's also helped start a sexual assault resource center in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, where she resided, and became an on-call advocate for survivors of sexual assault. From 1999 until moving to Illinois in 2004, she served on Wisconsin's Crime Victims' Rights Board, a quasi-judicial board whose role was to ensure that the rights provided to crime victims by the Wisconsin Constitution and Wisconsin statutes were properly upheld. And in addition to all of her amazing work, Beerntsen also keeps busy with her family, enjoys visiting with her grandchildren, and she volunteers at Northwestern University's Center on Wrongful Convictions, Lurie's Children's Hospital, and the Morton Arboretum. Now, while Beerntsen acknowledges that she'll always be known as the woman who misidentified Stephen Avery, she hopes that in sharing her story with us tonight, that she'll be able to help prevent other mistaken identifications and raise our awareness about the dangers of mistaken identifications and wrongful convictions. And as a quick personal note, Penny, I truly think you're remarkable. I know our students are so lucky to hear from you tonight. I'm honored that you agreed to speak in this series. And you're an inspiration to me, and I know after hearing from you tonight, so many of our students will be touched by your courage, strength, and warmth. And I want to thank you for being here. And now, please help me give a very warm welcome to Penny Beerntsen.
Thank you so much, Sherry, for that very kind and generous introduction, which is over the top. I greatly appreciate it, and it truly is an honor for me to be here tonight. I think one of the important roles all of you can play is that you're interested in criminal justice and in you're all potential jurors. And I think that's one thing we need to do is really educate the general public on some of the issues regarding not only eyewitness but the vulnerability of juveniles, false confessions, and that sort of thing. So thank you for deciding to spend some time together this evening. I greatly appreciate it. On February 22nd, 2004, Stephen Avery and I had a brief meeting at the State Capitol building in Madison, Wisconsin. The meeting started with a handshake. It ended with a hug. It was the first time the two of us had had any physical contact, yet our lives had been intertwined for almost 2 decades. You see, I'm the woman who stood in court in December of 1985, pointed at Stephen Avery and said I was absolutely certain that he was the man that had assaulted me, and I was absolutely wrong. Many of the things that I'm going to share with you in chronological order tonight, I did not know at the time of the assault, and I did not learn until after Stephen was exonerated and the Attorney General conducted an investigation. But for simplicity's sake and to make this story flow a little better, I've put things in chronological order. The assault began, or the story begins on July 29th, 1985. I was living in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, small town of 32,000, about 70 miles north of Milwaukee on the shores of Lake Michigan. My husband Tom and I owned a chocolate business, and we had 2 children. Our daughter Julie was 11 at the time, and our son Mike was 10. And as we often did after work, we went to Neshoto Beach, which leads into Point Beach State Park in Two Rivers, Wisconsin, the next town north of Manitowoc. On this particular day, it was a beautiful sunny day. Our son had not gone with us, so it was just my daughter, my husband, and I. And I decided to go for a jog along the beach. I started at Neshoto Beach, and it runs right into Point Beach State Park. When I was just beginning my jog, a man was standing about from here to not quite to the back of the room, away from me. He had a leather jacket slung over his shoulder, and as I jogged by, he looked at me and said, "It's a great day." And I turned and glanced at him, and I said, "Yep, it's a great day for a jog." Didn't think anything about our little interaction. Continued jogging north another couple miles, turned around, and I looked at my watch because the previous day I had done this same run, and when I turned around to head back towards my starting point, there was a strong headwind. It took me quite a while to get back, and my husband was concerned because I had been gone longer than normal. So I looked at my watch, and it said 3:50 p.m. It's a bright, sunny day. Within a minute or two of me looking at my watch, my assailant came out from under a half-fallen tree, which is circled up here, and started after me. He was wearing a leather jacket, and I realized it was the same guy who had talked to me earlier, had gone down the beach, found a hiding place, and was waiting for me. I increased my speed, but unfortunately I wasn't running fast enough. He caught up with me and grabbed me. I screamed for help. There was a sailboat out in the water, and I thought maybe someone would hear me, so I screamed for help, and he tightened his chokehold so that I could no longer speak. And when he grabbed me, I clearly remember 2 things. I'm not a calm person, but I remember thinking, I need to stay calm. And my second thought was, I need to get a good look at this guy, because if I survive this attack, I want to be able to identify him. My assailant pushed me up into the sand dune area, and it looks flat here, but it's not. It's rolling sand dunes. And once I was up over the edge of the first sand dune, I was no longer visible to anybody who might be passing on the beach. At one point, he loosened his grip. He was trying to take some of my clothes off. And when I felt him loosen his grip, I twisted to try and get away. He tightened his grip, and he said to me, "Do what I tell you, I've got a knife." And I remember thinking, I wonder where he's got the knife. I wonder how much I can struggle before he pulls out the knife and uses it. When we got into the wooded area, he turned me so that we were face to face and started asking me to perform sexual acts. And I kept refusing. And the more I refused, the more angry he became. And I started talking to him about my husband and about my children. I said, my husband's going to be along any minute. I jog this route all the time. He knows how long it takes me. I've been gone way too long. I talked about my kids. I didn't name them, but I talked about them. I said, I have 2 young kids. just let me go, I won't report this, I won't tell anybody what happened. I was saying anything I thought he needed to hear that would maybe make him feel a little bit of sympathy or just get scared and flee. But the more I talked, the more angry he became. He eventually pushed me down on the ground, had me pinned to the ground, and kept saying, spread your legs, and I kept refusing. I eventually brought one leg up, kicked him in the groin. It was not an incapacitating kick, unfortunately, but what it did was it served to enrage him. And he said, now I'm going to kill you, now you're going to die. And then he began beating me. He was shaking my head and shoulders up and down, and I was hitting the back of my head on either a rock or a tree root. And then eventually he strangled me until I lost consciousness. Now again, it's amazing when you think you might be taking your last breath, the thoughts that can go through your mind in an instant. And I specifically remember 3. The first was our son Mike had hopped on his bike and ridden off in the morning to spend the day with a friend, and I hadn't had a chance to kiss him goodbye, and I would never have that opportunity again. My second thought was that our daughter Julie was with us, and her last vision of me would be my strangled, naked body lying in the sand. And my third thought was that my husband was now going to have to raise 2 young children on his own. When I came to, I was very disoriented. I looked at my watch, but I couldn't see it. I thought he had actually stolen it, but my assailant hadn't. It was just from the head injury. My vision was very blurry. I also noticed there was blood on my hand. Now, I had tried to scratch my assailant's face. I wanted to leave marks on him so someone would question him. But whenever I would reach for him, he would straighten his arms, and his arms were longer than mine. So I didn't think I had succeeded, but there was blood on my hands. As it turns out, it was blood from my broken nose. It was my own blood. But anyway, I had the presence of mind to think, I need to preserve this. I was too weak to stand, so I crawled through the sand with my hands in this position back to the water's edge. I thought I had crawled in a straight line. When the police later went back with the canine unit, I had actually zigzagged. And I do remember sort of fading in and out of consciousness. When they recreated the timeline, there's approximately an hour of time for which I'm unable to account. When I got to the shoreline, I looked to the north, and there was a young couple on the beach, and I hollered to them for help. The words were clear in my head, but they came out garbled, as if I had had a stroke. Again, it was from the head injury. But this young couple came over, wrapped me in some towels, helped me stand, asked if I could walk, and I shook my head that I could, and then we started back towards my starting point. My husband, in the meantime, had called the police to report me missing. He had called his father to pick up our young daughter, and then he had come looking for me, and eventually the Good Samaritans met up with my husband. My husband picked me up and ran back to my starting point where an ambulance was already waiting. I was taken to the emergency room of a local hospital, where Manitowoc County Sheriff's Deputy Judy Dvorak questioned me about the assault and about the physical description of my assailant. She took statements from me intermittently over a 3 to 4 hour period, and while she was taking my statement, which was not tape recorded, she was just taking notes, the nurses were performing the highly intrusive rape protocol kit. They were drawing blood, they were taking me for x-rays. So my statement was given in a pretty disjointed fashion. But eventually I was given a statement that Judy Dvorak had written out. She handed it to me, told me to read it carefully and initial the bottom of each page. My vision was still blurry from the head injury. I think I said to her, I can't read it. But I'm not sure if I said that or if I just thought it. But anyway, I initialed the bottom of each page. At some point while I was in the emergency room, the sheriff also came in. His name was Tom Kasarik. Now, I should tell you, Manitowoc, the city of Manitowoc had 32,000 residents. The county had 80,000 in 1985. Small town. The sheriff's name was Tom, his wife's name was Penny. My name is Penny, my husband's name is Tom. We went to the same church. We sat 2 pews behind Tom Kasarik and his wife Penny on a regular basis. He had 3 daughters. His middle daughter was the same age as one of our daughters. The whole point of this is we were pretty interconnected in this small town. Stephen Avery was out on bail awaiting trial on a reckless endangerment charge. In January of 1985, he attempted to assault the sheriff's deputy's wife. What happened was, she happened to be his cousin, or was married to his cousin. She was going to work early in the morning, and it was an icy January day. A truck goes past her, sideswipes her, and forces her into the ditch. She thinks it's simply a car accident. She stops. Stephen Avery gets out of his truck, walks over to her vehicle, points a rifle at her, and says, "Get in my car." She says, "I've got my baby with me, she'll freeze. Please let me get my baby to safety." And he looks, stands up, he looks in the window, he sees the baby, and he lets her go. She goes to her parents' house and reports the incident to the sheriff. So Steve is out on bail awaiting trial when I give my description. Now, Judy Dvorak lives in rural Michigan, where Stephen Avery lived. They are, in fact, neighbors. So I give a description of a man that sounds like Stephen Avery. She knows he's out on bail, and she thinks, wow, this sounds like my neighbor. She apparently, I'm told, shares this with the sheriff, who calls his department and asks that a group of photos matching the description of my assailant be sent to the hospital, and that Stephen Avery's photo be included among them. After I was in the emergency room for 3 to 4 hours, I was eventually taken to a room. My vision had now cleared, I could see clearly, and I was asked to give a description for a police artist. And this is the sketch that he came up with. Following the making of the composite, and before I viewed the photo lineup, I said to the sheriff and the deputy, "Do you have a suspect in mind?" And I was told yes. So immediately after that, the sheriff put 9 photos in 3 rows of 3 on my bedside table. And unfortunately, I don't have a photo representation of the photo lineup. But at any rate, I correctly assumed, because the sheriff told me he had a suspect in mind, that the suspect's photo would be in the lineup. Again, I looked carefully at all 9 photos, and I selected Stephen Avery's photo. It's my understanding that Stephen was arrested at his home approximately midnight on July 29th, or about 8 hours after I was assaulted. This was my first experience with the criminal justice system, and I had no idea that that's really fast for an arrest to occur. The next morning, my husband told me that the photo I selected, the man whose photo I selected had been arrested, and the sheriff's department confirmed that it was the suspect that they had in mind. At around midnight of the first or second night I was home from the hospital, I received an obscene phone call that was sexual in nature. I remember saying to the